Great turnout. Nice to see everyone here. I'm Ann Phibbs, Director of Education in the Office for Equity and Diversity. Welcome to Out of the Studio and Into the Streets, using design thinking to advance equity and sustainability. Our fourth conversation in this, our fifth year of the Critical Conversations about Diversity and Justice series. We meet again in February. We usually have our flyers. We forgot them today, but next month we'll be talking about how to raise socially aware children in an unjust world. So if you're interested in that topic, come back. The Critical Conversation series is co-sponsored by the University Libraries. The libraries have developed a list of further academic resources on each of our Critical Conversation topics, which you can link to on our Critical Conversations webpage. We continue to offer live streaming of our conversations so that you can watch via our website in real time or at a later date, since they'll be archived on that website. We've also added an opportunity for you to provide feedback on this series. If you've signed in, we will email a link to an online evaluation, or you may access that link again on our webpage. I do think every person from the College of Design is maybe in this room. Am I right? Are a lot of you from the College of Design? I'm assuming, but we're packed. For those of you watching, we're packed, which feels wonderful. And we welcome everyone here. As with all of our conversations, we'll start with some discussion among our panelists and moderator, and then move out to you all for questions and answers. So let me introduce my colleague, who actually works down the hall from me and is just a wonderful person to work with. Virajita Singh is Assistant Vice Provost in the Office for Equity and Diversity at the University of Minnesota, where she brings her expertise in design thinking, public interest design, and partnership studies to catalyze and support equity and diversity work of colleges and academic units across the university. She's also a senior research fellow and adjunct assistant professor in the College of Design, where she leads the Design for Community Resilience program she founded at the Center for Sustainable Building Research, which provides sustainable and regenerative design assistance to greater Minnesota communities on building and landscape projects. From 2011 to 2015, she began and led design thinking at College of Design here at the University of Minnesota, a collaborative group that worked to unlock the creative potential of individuals and organizations across sectors to innovate in fulfilling their mission using the emerging field of design thinking. I am very new to this design thinking, so it's good I'm leaving the podium very soon. But I've learned a tremendous amount just having Virajita as a colleague, so I'm excited to be here. Please welcome Virajita Singh.
Thank you, Anne. Welcome, all of you. It's a packed house. It's wonderful to see. And I think not the least because of our panelists here today. So thank you for joining us for this conversation on your precious Friday afternoon. As the title, Out of the Studio and Into the Streets suggests, our conversation today will not only be about design thinking as a process, that is emerging perhaps from the realm of an exclusive or mysterious design studio and entering into the open air of the streets where everyone can see and experience it. I'm also grateful that this conversation is happening at a time when it seems as this eventful week nationally shows us we are in the middle of radical shifts and a new and unfamiliar order is emerging. Many of us are unsure what that order is, and others among us perhaps see the signs and would like to creatively counter or shift that order. Drawing on my own work at the College of Design that involved offering design thinking consulting to nonprofit sector while collaborating with other higher ed partners, I learned three things. First, I learned that there was a rising interest out there of people from all walks of life and outside the design and arts disciplines seeking to learn about creativity and design who are eager to apply it. There's a hunger out there for creative literacy and creative application to redesign our systems. Second, I learned that when you combine the wisdom of people who are embedded in our large systems, such as healthcare, education, or perhaps even our government, with tapping their creativity and instituting the permission and perhaps even a mandate to be creative, while having also their back as they do the experimentation, things can happen. Finally, I also learned that not enough designers and artists are engaged in this role of teaching and working to build creative capacities of those who are interested in it. We need many more designers serving to build creative confidence and teaching skills of radical design collaboration that they themselves practice to anyone who is seeking them. And I hope many of you are in the room ready to take on that task. This brings me to our panel here. Each of our panelists is doing remarkable work in the arts, in education, in higher education, in healthcare. All of their work is both affecting and embedded in communities and is being done with a sense of empowerment of those they're working with, from youth to adults to elders. They will soon each share briefly about their ideas and work, and we will then follow that presentation with questions. I hope you will enjoy the afternoon and ask questions that challenge us to understand design thinking better and its applications as well, and help us think together how we at this particular point and critical moment of time might engage in creatively shaping our collective futures. I'll start by introducing Linnea. A minute here. Oh, I may have missed your bio, I'm sorry. No, actually it's right. No, it isn't. Sorry about that. I'll go on to introduce the others and then pull yours. So I'll start with Tom Fisher. Tom Fisher is professor in the School of Architecture, the Dayton Hudson Chair in Urban Design at the University of Minnesota, and the director of the Metropolitan Design Center at the College of Design. He was recognized in 2005 as the 5th most published writer about architecture in the United States. He has written 9 books, over 50 book chapters or introductions, and over 400 articles in professional journals and major publications. Named a top 25 design educator 4 times by Design Intelligence, he has lectured at 36 universities and over 150 professional and public meetings. I think many of you may know that Tom Fisher served as the Dean of College of Design for 19 years, inspiring generations of students, of which I was actually one, in transforming the profession and society towards the public good using design and design thinking. So please welcome Tom Fisher. Deanna Dodds Cummings has a Master's of Public Administration from Harvard University. She is the CEO and co-founder of Juxtaposition Arts, a cultural development center and teen staff design firm founded in 1995 in North Minneapolis. She has presented about equity in the arts, creative placemaking, leadership, social entrepreneurship, and asset-based youth development at universities and museums across the country. Minneapolis Public Radio named Cummings a 2013 Arts Hero. In 2014, she was elected to the Board of Trustees of the Archibald Bush Foundation. Deanna recently presented to the United Nations to millennial philanthropists interested in impact investing. But I'll also read some statistics here. Since 2010, more than 400 youth have worked alongside professionals in Juxta's screen printing, graphic design, contemporary art, fashion design, and urban design studios. They design pocket parks, interactive public art, screen printed apparel, logos, and other products for clients, and generated $200,000 for organizations. So this is really, please welcome. Dr. Potter. Dr. Teddy Potter has been a nurse educator for over 16 years. She has shown a long-term commitment to diversity and inclusivity, studying factors that help diverse students succeed in nursing school and teaching healing traditions of our diverse community. Her current positions in the School of Nursing at the University of Minnesota are a natural extension of her interests and passions. She's the coordinator of the Doctor of Nursing practice in Health Innovation and Leadership, where she's actually bringing design thinking, and the Director of Inclusivity and Diversity. One of the core pillars of the DNP in Health Innovation and Leadership is design thinking. Potter believes this way of thinking is essential if nurses are to be full partners in redesigning the healthcare system in the United States. And specifically, Teddy Potter and I are part of an effort in the diversity community of practice that is going on here at the University of Minnesota. And we've just started a design thinking studio to work on challenges within our units here. So thank you so much. Please welcome Teddy. And I really apologize, but I'm pulling up Linnea's bio.
It's worth the wait.
Yes, it is. I hope the wireless helps me here.
I'm on LinkedIn. It's okay.
Just want to. Yep, here it is. Let me just. All right. Linnea Atlas Ingebretson joined Minneapolis Public Schools December 2014 as a Director of Family and Partnerships. Linnea has spent 20 years in higher education, nonprofit, and public administration, and outdoor adventure work. Her innovative work has included working with Ideas to Go, U of M Design School as Design Associate on the Higher Ed Redesign Project, which I had the pleasure of working with her, several design and creative projects for Minneapolis Public Schools and the Forum on Workplace Inclusion. She excels at aligning resources, people, and authentic engagement with diverse communities. Linnea is passionate about public education and believes that student achievement will increase with effective and innovative partnerships with families and communities. So please welcome Linnea. So with that, maybe we can start with you, Linnea. If you would just give us maybe a brief introduction to your work, and then we'll work across the panel and then come back to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people in the room for this topic. I really didn't know what to expect. I'll just start a little bit about myself. My first love in life really came from my parents, and it's fine arts. And I spent most of my time in my educational pre-college experience working towards that end. And there are other things that I care about, and equity and the well-being of my community is something that I couldn't turn away from. So in college, I decided to pursue a degree in nonprofit administration so that I could really know how to make a difference and change in that space. What I learned early on, thanks to a for-profit organization called Ideas to Go, is that creativity is something that is so powerful and so essential to creating everything around us. Our ideas, our solutions, the things we sit on, the things we write with. But what's interesting, as we get older, even in elementary school, creativity is kind of beaten out of us. You're not cool if you do something different, right? When you're acting crazy or want to wear a tutu during the school day, or your pajamas to school or something, anything, you're told that's not right, that's not normal, and that just progresses throughout life. And what I found is, as I was transitioning into college, I was self-censoring myself even more, having left my fine arts space in the professional space. And thanks to Ideas to Go, I really learned and honed the practice of forcing myself to exercise the muscle of creativity and to resist self-censorship. Later on, design thinking started to really become a thing, and it was such a wonderful transition from thinking creatively to solve problems and knowing that that was a sound practice to now having a group of people who was applying theory and thought to that and legitimizing that as a part of what they do. Some of the things that I'd really encourage people to think about, those who are here, really around design thinking and its intersection with equity, is the notion that you need designers that have some type of formal training as a designer in some type of design-related field. I think that's really important and powerful as a part of the team, but I believe that every single person around us needs to be connected to that creativity to solve the things that they engage with every day in their life and can be the designers themselves. So I really believe strongly that you build the capacity of the designers. Instead of just looking at empathy and observation, how do you take the people most impacted by what you're trying to solve or what you're trying to create and have them be the solution, have them be the designers. And you need to think deeply about that. You need to build that practice. And in order to be inclusive, you need to make sure that the designers who might be a part of your work because they're important too, have the ability to work inclusively with those who might be the user in the context of design thinking. But I think that users are the linchpin to really being effective and creating sustainable changes, and that they absolutely have the capacity to do it. So I just want to share that with you. It's a little different aspect of my approach to this work than what some of the other folks in practice has been. So I really focus on building users who have the capacity to utilize what they have to bring to the table. A couple other things I'd just like to mention as it relates to design thinking. I just participated in a session on a part of a project we're working on at Minneapolis Public Schools, facilitated by a wonderful person. But the space that we operate in has to be inclusive by design. So some things I just encourage you to always think about. What is the cultural context you're bringing to your project? And really thinking, is that the same of everyone you want to be in the space? And is that space designed in a way where your cultural context is most comfortable, or that will be inclusive to all the different cultural groups that are going to be in that space? Beyond that, is it accessible? One of the activities that was done required jumping and moving, and there were 2 people in the room who obviously couldn't do that for different reasons, and nothing was changed about the practice. So there are those obvious things around accessibility that you have to think about, but if you're not approaching the work from an understanding and awareness of your own dominant lens, we all have it, we all bring it to the table, but you really have to take a step back, not just follow kind of the cookie cutter, here's what we do for design thinking, but really step back and understand the cultural context and the multicultural context and ability levels we're in, and be intentional around that. I'd also say that it's important to not tokenize observations and the user. And I think that there's risk for that in not involving them as being the designers. It's easy to say, I observed this and I saw that, so I'm going to do this. It's a different thing to be forced into a long-standing relationship as a part of a design team with people who you're working on the behalf of, and who should be honored as a part of also working on the behalf of themselves. And context matters so much, and I feel like this is the last point I'll make. I feel like this is a challenge in our equity work and in our inclusion work, and frankly in the challenges that Rajada spoke to about where we're at today. Many of the growing communities in the metropolitan area here and in many parts of our country come from high context backgrounds. The foundation of their communication is not just set on language written or spoken, but it's set on the history of relationship, not with them, but with their community, with their relations. That is a core difference from the way dominant culture approaches work. It doesn't make it right or wrong, but the difference between high context cultural groups and communication and low context cultural communications, I feel, is a major source for a lot of conflict, and frankly, some of the perceptions that when we diversify efforts, it comes with challenges. I really think it comes back to when we rely on our standard method of communication, and that is discongruent with those we're seeking to work with, we get lazy. We just do. We think it's hard. We don't take that extra step. But I do feel like that's a major challenge in creating equity in design thinking projects, is that when we want to force to one way or another. But I know we'll have opportunities to speak later, but I just want to do a shout out. Some of the greatest work I've done around this has been with Viragito, working with 400 people from nonprofits in a short period of time, but also with Youth Prize. And Nisi and Libby Rao are here from Youth Prize over there. They're doing design thinking in that way with our youth and with adults, equal footing at the table. So there are people doing this work. I'm not talking anything special. There's no magic throne. It's a skill and it's a knowledge base that can be learned if you seek it.
I'm going to stand up because I'm short, and this isn't about seeing me, it's about seeing you. I can only see the people in the front row if I sit down, and I really want to see all of you. I want to mention that we're in the context, and I'm so glad you raised that, because we're in a shared context right now. And that is, I think we're in a state of revolution. And revolution is defined as a sudden, extreme, or complete change in the way people live, work, and I think we're there. We don't need to be afraid. We were in a state of revolution when we went from made some changes from hunter-gathering to agriculture. Then we were in revolution when we went from agriculture to industrial. And now we're going from industrial to, you name it, digital, artificial intelligence, global, whatever it is, we're in the midst of it right now. We can either be afraid and go scratching and clawing back to what we knew as the previous evolution, or we can go forward and co-create where we're moving. And that's where I'd like to invite us. Every revolution that we have ever been in has required a different way of relating to one another, so thank you very much, and a different way of thinking. I believe that the different way of relating is a partnership base rather than domination, and I believe the way of thinking is design thinking. So what am I doing with that? Why am I doing that? I think design thinking is the only way we will be able to recreate or create a new healthcare system that works for everyone. And why do I like this form of thinking? It has some elements that we are not traditionally taught in our schools of healthcare providers. So all my students in health innovation and leadership end up understanding design thinking and earning a certificate in design thinking and innovation. I am that passionate about this. So these are the elements I want to share with you about design thinking, those of you that aren't familiar with it. Embrace diversity in all its forms. This is not something politically correct to do. It is the way we will design a system that works for everyone. Radical collaboration, so that you are really pulling in the partnerships that you talked about, not top over one, and not assuming that just observing is enough, but really caring for the people that you're working with. Starting with empathy for the user. This is critical. Instead of having the solutions in our mind, and I'm going to tell you what you need to know and where you have problems, and I will observe you, as you said, and then I will pull in out of my backpack all the interventions that I know work. You do not start there. You start with empathy for the people you serve. And out of that deep, robust empathy, you work together to co-create the solution that's going to work best. That's radical in healthcare thinking. Radical. The other piece is a bias for action. Instead of making sure things are perfect before we roll them out, we move. You start to look. Now in healthcare that can be a little dangerous because we don't want to risk lives. We don't want to move so fast that we kill people. But we want to move. We want to start implementing change. And so again, that challenges the old way of thinking. And this perhaps is one of my favorites, being willing to fail forward. That failing is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of lack of thinking appropriately. It is a sign that you are learning. So we don't need to be afraid of, oh, that didn't work. It might not have worked. So how are we going to change it so it works better the next time? Every time we move, you look at that and evaluate that. Those are key essential pieces of shifting healthcare. So we're using this. In the School of Nursing, we're using this, and my students are lit, and they're changing the way things are working. And so I'm pumped up about design thinking, so excited about it, and feel that it is the thinking for the new revolution. I would just like to close with a story. I went to my annual or every 6-month dentist appointment early this morning. A little boy came and sat across from me, and he had a towel tied around his neck, and obviously he was a superhero. And eventually I kind of got up my nerve and I said, oh, I'm so glad there's a superhero in the room, especially at the dentist's office. That's really a good thing. And his mom said, yeah, his cape is dirty, so we had to use a towel. But you go, Mom. That's great that you didn't take this child's creativity away. But then I said to the child, and every single one of us needs to remember that we're a superhero. That's the revolution we're talking about. That's what we need to co-create a future that works for everyone. So go out here, put your capes on, and let's work together.
Thank you, Dr. Singh and my co-panelist. I very much appreciate being here. I'm Deanna Cummings. Dr. Singh introduced me. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of an organization called Juxtaposition Arts based in North Minneapolis. We are a youth-focused visual art and design social enterprise, a contemporary art studio, and a locally rooted cultural development center. We've been around for 22 years. And I'll start by just saying a little bit about my background, and then I'll say a little bit about our work at Juxtaposition Arts. And then I'll have sort of one thematic thought that, that I'll probably carry through to the rest of our presentation. Juxta started as a program in the Sumner-Glenwood public housing community, created to be a place where kids who grew up like myself and my founding partners, low-income kids, kids raised by single moms, kids who were gifted and talented in a lot of ways. Like we tested gifted and talented on the tests, but at a certain point in our trajectory, became very disinterested in sitting in a classroom and hearing from teachers about what they thought was important for us to learn, teachers that were teaching to test and so on. So we were kids who also skipped school a lot, kids who got suspended now and again, kids who started businesses when we were still in high school. We had a greeting card business. I had a typing business back when you could have a typing business. We painted backdrops and went out to big public festivals like Aquatennial and Juneteenth and took Polaroid pictures of people that were dressed up to come to the event and sold them to them for $5. So we were kids who were entrepreneurial, socially conscious, smart, but also considered to be at risk. And we recognized as we grew up that we got our legs under us through our involvement in art and design and entrepreneurship. We came to realize what we were good at, what we cared about, what we had to contribute to the world, what we weren't so good at, and that kids in North Minneapolis needed a space where they could have those same kinds of opportunities. So we created Juxtability to be a place we wish we had around when we were kids growing up in the Twin Cities, and that and recognizing that there were no other centers where young people could engage in hands-on, high-quality, comprehensive arts opportunities in North Minneapolis. So we were initially a traditional visual art after-school arts enrichment program. In 2010, we really shifted direction, and a better way to say it is probably we built on our foundation and changed our strategy from art exclusively as a means to enrich individual young people's lives to art and design as a way to contribute to individuals' vibrancy, but as well as communities, professions, fields, our region. We launched a program that is called Juxtalab. It is a social enterprise, a program a business that exists under the umbrella of Juxtaposition Arts, where we're training and employing young people who work in a mentor-apprenticeship relationship in small cohorts with professional artists and designers, where they're making real products and providing services for clients. As Professor Singh indicated, we design logos, we do community engagement work, we've done small area master plans, we do large-scale public sculptures, we do murals, we screen print t-shirts, we create cut and sew fashion. We have 5 divisions: screen printing and fashion, contemporary and public art, graphic design, urban design and environmental design, and then a program called Tactical Urbanism. And Tactical Urbanism is the program or the studio that I think is most applicable to what we're going to be talking about today. And I will just read a brief description of Tactical, because we're developing some new language to describe how we talk about it. So Juxta's Tactical Lab uses art, design, and other practices that amplify community voice, build community knowledge, and interrupt patterns of disinvestment in our city. By combining art and design with urban planning, research, community building, and engagement, we create needed interventions in public space and talk with people about issues affecting them in that space. Since 2013, Tactical has worked on a variety of projects, some of them initiated by Juxta and some of them with partners and clients in North Minneapolis and around the city. Tactical regularly collaborates with local and national planners, designers, community organizers, artists, and engineers as well. Our Tactical program grew out of a relationship, a long-term partnership with the University of Minnesota College of Design back when Tom Fisher was the head of the College of Design and continues still to this day. It's in its 12th year of collaboration. But what Tactical is about at its very root, if we sort of boiled it down, is about amplifying and rising up new narratives. Positive asset-based narratives about North Minneapolis and the people and the places that make up North Minneapolis. And I would even argue new narratives about our city and about our region as a whole. The narrative we are seeking to amplify is a narrative about North Minneapolis as a contributor, as a productive area of our city, as a city where, as an area of our city where people are bubbling over with creativity, as an area that is untapped in terms of its potential to contribute to the vibrancy that our region is very well known for. And I would argue that the narrative that we hope will be adopted and understood by both North Minneapolis and the broader city is a narrative that says if the city of Minneapolis and our region doesn't figure out how to include the voices of the diverse people in this city, and in particular a community that has been disinvested from like North Minneapolis, then our region won't maintain its competitive edge. So it isn't a matter of investing in North Minneapolis or working with North Minneapolis because it's sort of the right thing to do or from a perspective of being a benevolent, charitable person. It's a matter of all of our fates are tied up in our ability to engage with all of the people in our community in significant ways, in ways that have material, social, and geographic benefit to everyone involved. The last thing I'll say that ties to that point with regard to design thinking. My organization isn't trained in design thinking, and we don't think of ourselves always as necessarily working from a design thinking from a design thinking platform, but we use a model that very much mirrors design thinking in a lot of ways. We start from an opportunity or a problem, and in fact, our shift toward the Juxta Lab model follows this sort of the step-by-step process. We start from an opportunity or problem. We next generate ideas with as large a group of people as possible. We then move into research. We sort of look and find out what's been done about this, which of our ideas sort of make sense, and research and talk to people. Then we go into planning. And we don't spend too long in planning. We spend just as much time as we need to feel like we're somewhat secure before we move into pilot and prototyping. We pilot and prototype for a period that has a start and an end. Then we evaluate, we adjust, and then we begin again. Lastly, I will say that the idea that art and design will save us, I think, is a falsehood, and I think it deserves to. It requires us to interrogate that idea. Art and design is not automatically a values positive undertaking. And I think that that is often the way we present ideas that emanate from art and design backgrounds, that it's always value positive or value neutral at a minimum. I would argue that art and design can be damaging, destructive, violent in many ways, and that we must interrogate that idea that it is always values positive. And I'll say more about that if I have an opportunity during the conversation. So, thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Deanna. Wonderful panel. I think the idea of out of the studio into the streets is something that we are all fortunate to have the opportunity as being one of the few urban land grant universities. And so I see this as something we all have as a community to see as part of our responsibility, that we're in the midst of this incredible region, and what responsibilities do we have. I wanted to just say a little bit about the center I'm running. So I stepped down as a dean because I actually wanted to do more of this work. I couldn't do enough of it given my other day job. And so I now run a center, a Minnesota Design Center, that really looks at how design thinking can happen both in the physical world as well as in this area of what's called service design, human-centered design. So, and one of the things I find about this is a shift that's going on in my own fields. I mean, I'm out of one of the design disciplines, architecture, and our fields have long been defined by the outcome, like architects do buildings. And what's really happening is that there are so many design problems in the world that go way beyond producing physical things. And so while we still need environments and products, we also have all of these communities and systems and services that really need to be rethought in fundamental ways, and given the kind of revolution that Teddy was just mentioning. And so, you know, for example, so we do urban design, but when we do it, we really work in communities that we really engage the community in the opportunities that are around them, and it's about empowerment. So it's flipping the model, the old model of the professional coming in to tell people what to do and to say, here are opportunities. What would you like to do with these opportunities? What are the opportunities that you see that we haven't seen? So for example, we did a project, we've been engaged in a project with the Department of Transportation around lidding over highways that divided communities in the 50s and 60s, and sort of basically making the argument that DOT has a moral obligation to re-heal these communities. And so that conversation over the last couple of years has gone from there thinking we were crazy to actually saying, how quickly can we do this? So we're a project underway in the Rondo community in St. Paul, and we're also in conversations about the Farview Park area in North Minneapolis as opportunities to engage the community, to re-heal communities, and to have them all part of the design process. So the designers are more facilitators, enablers in all of this work. We're also working in rural Minnesota. There are incredible opportunity gaps there as well as rural communities change. So we have a project underway called Minnesota Futures, which is really taking an asset-based approach to these communities, where we have come through a century where it's always about deficits, what people lack, what communities lack, when in fact, communities are rich in human capital, social capital, environmental capital, and helping them see the richness and wealth that they have among themselves and how they can leverage that to move their community forward is really rewarding work. And it's always surprising. What's great about doing this work is you never, you know, it's not ever what you think it's going to be, but it's always better than what you thought it could be in the process. And then we also do a lot of service design, this whole area of work where it may not end up producing anything tangible. I'll give you a couple examples. So we've been working with the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta because they were basically teaching all their leadership these skills. And it comes out of their recognition in the Ebola crisis that they weren't being innovative enough. So they were wondering why they couldn't get a hold on the Ebola crisis. Well, it turns out that they were brought in by the governments in West Africa, and the people don't trust the government, so they didn't trust the CDC. So it was a matter of asking them, well, who do you trust? Well, it turns out they trust their relatives in the United States. So the way to get information to West Africans was via their relatives in the United States, using their social networks, and they trusted their relatives. So often in design thinking, the solution is way beyond the context where you think you're working. And again, using relationships in these kind of intangible designed systems as solutions. And we're currently working also at a really, to me, an interesting project with Hennepin County Medical Center on homelessness. So there's about over 4,000 homeless people who come to the emergency room at HCMC, and the hospital came to us to say, you know, we have to find another way. First of all, we help them and then we send them right back out in the street and they get ill again and they come back in. Well, it turns out that as we've looked at the system for this, that if you look at this as not an issue of housing the homeless, but basically these are chronically ill people who need patient rooms, that Medicaid actually funds patient rooms. And so we're developing a process of engaging all of the Medicaid payers. In fact, I have a meeting this afternoon with the Council on Health Plans. It will pay for patient rooms. And so we're working with the homeless population to imagine what kind of spaces they need. And these may be remote care communities. And so, again, one of the ways in which design thinking brings value is it looks at a system and it starts asking kind of, well, what if questions? Well, what if you rethought this in a different way? You came at it from a different perspective. All of a sudden, all kinds of opportunities open up. And that's why this mode of thinking is so valuable to every single field and every single community. It's a mindset shift. It's an asset-oriented approach to life. It's a creative what-if way of thinking about everything we do. And as everybody on the panel has said, it is really the future. It is full of opportunities. Maybe I'll just end because I know that we're all, many of us are, unnerved by what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. So I'm, for example, working with a group of colleagues who do design thinking across not only the U.S. but into Europe about rethinking the wall, right? So this absurd idea of building a wall on our southern border, right? So we're proposing that we create a collaborative space. We create a space where the communities from both countries can engage in creative startup activities that is not about keeping people out, but welcoming people in and letting them collaborate and define the relationship between our two countries. And so we, again, have to move beyond this way of thinking that's about fear of the future to see that the future is actually full of possibilities if we see it the right way. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much. Each of you gave us really important ideas and insights into how this work might be approached. So I'm going to start with some questions, and I hope you all have many questions to ask us as a group. So I'm interested in what, Deanna, you talked about, sort of, design thinking will save us all. I'm going to go to that sort of notion. Because I've seen both spectrums, design thinking will save us all, and then the other notion is design thinking is dead. Have you seen that? Yeah, there's all of this, and usually it is so that because somebody's trying to propose another new idea, and they have to kill design thinking before that one can be proposed. But I think there are, so the question is, does design thinking and applied creativity truly accomplish redesign of some of the systems that we've talked about before? And then also, are there some preconditions to transforming a system using design thinking? So this is sort of most asking, like, what are the mindsets we need to have before we can engage in this process? Well, how do we need to think about the entry point? Because a lot of times it's daunting for people who are not familiar with that process to kind of engage in it. So anybody? Yeah.
Did you want me to start,
start, please
potentially?
start,
Okay. So my response to that question, can design thinking restructure systems? Can design thinking really change systems? My response is kind of, sometimes. And I'm speaking strictly from my own experiences, and other people have
Exactly.
different answers. I think that in my experience, design thinking can impact components of systems. Design thinking can push on pieces of systems, but I don't think we can strictly rely on design thinking to dismantle systems. Because I think in many cases, changing systems, pushing on systems in the way we would like them, redesigning systems to look the way we would like them to look, requires a total dismantle and a rebuilding. And I don't know that design thinking is set up to do that all the time. To say it in a really plain way, because we're talking about equity and diversity, design thinking won't kill white supremacy. And white supremacy needs to die. And design thinking is not going to fix it. But that being said, I can give examples of ways in which juxtaposition arts, again, has used a design thinking-like process to change policy and to change pieces of systems such that those systems are more equitable, include more diverse representation than they did previously. One small example is in order to install public artwork in North Minneapolis, or in Minneapolis period, 10 or 15 years ago, you had to submit your designs to the Minneapolis Arts Commission, and then it also had to go in front of City Council. So they had to approve every single artwork design. If you were going to hang a set of banners, and in our case, we wanted to hang banners where each one of the banners was individual and unique, hand-painted, we had to submit each design before the Arts Commission and then the council, and they had to approve every single design. And that's problematic for a whole lot of reasons. Number one, it's our neighborhood. The young people that are designing the artworks for our neighborhood have a right to create works that reflect their history, their ideas, their hopes for the future, and the people that sit on the Arts Commission and hold office downtown really are ill-equipped to make decisions about which artwork is approved or not, should be approved or not approved. So they went through and they approved many of our designs, and then several of them they said they could not approve them. And we appealed and went down to the Arts Commission with the young people that were the artists, about a dozen young people who had designed the banners, and they took questions from the council members, the commissioners, about their designs, and then articulated the reason they felt these designs were exactly right for their neighborhood in North Minneapolis. And the council members reversed their decision and approved all of the designs, and then went back and changed the policy to say that they don't have to approve individual designs, they just have to approve of a project idea. But now, did we change the entire system of how the city council makes decisions about improvements to public space in the city of Minneapolis? No, but we made a shift. So.
Yeah, thank you. And so it's pointing to the actual engagement by the users, if you will, into the process.
And following on that, I mean, I do think it's important that you get leadership engaged too, because we found that if you get a community engaged, but there are people above them who can stop it,
Right.
It's very frustrating for the community. I mean, it's in some ways worse to have raised their hopes and got them excited when there's somebody else above them who squashes it. And so we've learned you've got to get the leadership in the process so that everybody has ownership of it.
Yeah.
I was just going to add to that. I think one of the key practices of design thinking is to be able to fail and to move past that failure and to recreate. That iterative process is so valuable to many things. But failure is a privilege. And we can think of all the protected class groups that don't get that right to fail. They don't get a second opportunity. If they fail, they're labeled, they're held to a higher standard, higher expectation, and research shows this time and time again. And in our community, we're told we show up early, we work twice as hard, we go home late, just to be seen as just the same as others. And often that's not even really what happens. So there's this aspect of power that absolutely isn't the case in many of the fields that people come from when they enter in. The process of getting certified in your field or educated in your field tells you to be competitive, tells you to be dominant. And so it's a real deep unlearning that has to go on in design teams. And I've seen that's been challenging, and it's broken teams. And we've seen that on projects. But it's got to be a core foundation of recognizing that and leveling and creating leveled power space in order for that to really happen. And absolutely, it comes down to implementation. So you can design the best solution, you still have to implement it. And leadership, senior sponsorship, whatever that is, seeing those things are really, really critical to being successful.
Thank you. Teddy.
I would just like to add an example from our world, or my world that I work in, and that is the Affordable Care Act. if people in our culture and our communities understood to approach things with design thinking, we would have said, this act offers a response to empathy for the people that are in our communities. We need to have some form of insurance for 30 million people that are currently uninsured. We need to guarantee that people with pre-existing conditions are protected. We need to see if youth can stay on their parents' policies to an age where they can be more economically independent. This is empathy for the people in our neighborhoods. But it's not going to be perfect. We're going to roll out the first iteration, see what happens, and then tweak it and roll again and roll again and roll again. So if all of us understood this way of thinking, we wouldn't be throwing out what works, we would be fixing what didn't work. And it wouldn't be shame-based and blame-based, and there's problems with the people that created it. We'd be going, we tried something, now let's try it again. Now let's try it again. And that's why we have to transform our thinking across the cultures, not just designers, not just, but across the communities.
Yeah, following on that, I gave a talk about design thinking to a public policy conference, and basically it was the argument that ideology kills innovation. Because ideologues already have the answer even before they've asked the question.
That's right.
And innovation comes from asking really good questions.
And listening.
And listening, and so, you know, they were shocked. I mean, the problem is on the public policy side, we have a lot of ideology, and it's a problem.
That's great. Thank you so much. I want to open it up to the audience. I know there's a lot of you here, and I know there's a lot of questions. Just one. We'll use a mic. Right here. Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, Teddy Potter. So the way you spoke about design thinking reminded me a lot of person-centered thinking. So could you put some what's the difference between the two?
The difference would be that I am going to avoid answering that question to some extent. In that I think there's room in the new model for multiple ways of processing information. So if the things I talked about, the elements or principles of design thinking, don't quite work, you want to name them something different and another model resonates with you, fine. The idea is we create shared, respectful space. And when she comes into the space and I come to the space, the solution occurs right here. And I don't care what you call it. I don't care how many steps you give it. The point is the relationships, which I think you've heard all of us address. So I'm not trying to avoid your question. I'm trying to reframe it into yes.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, there's one here.
Hi, I think this is mostly for Linnea and your comment earlier about tokenizing other or bringing them to space, and work in government where in order to sort of have diversity, you know, we always go to the same groups or the same people because that is the person from the Native American community, that is the person from the Black community, and it's seen as hard to open up the doors. I wonder if you have recommendations for explaining why it's okay for it to be hard and why we should do the work and how best to go about that.
I smile because I'm at Minneapolis Public Schools and we deal with this every day. Government, you know, deals with it. Nonprofits deal with it too. They do it just as much. For-profits do it as well. You know, so I think the first thing is that we, being dominant low context culture, all our systems are focused on that. The fastest way to get from point A to point B, written communication, sending an email. I hate emails, by the way, just really don't like them. I did tweet today, but you know, 140 characters, whatever. We hyper value that practice. It is a dying value. It's not going to die, but it is declining in its usability, and we're ignoring that. We have to find new ways as professionals of honing our skills so that we can be effective in our work. not just keep our job, but to truly be effective. And so to me, I think it is a reclassifying of skill sets required to be an effective professional, regardless of what you do. Things we have previously defined as being soft skills, being able to build relationships, things like that are core skills to a job, and they have to be honored as much as everything else. And frankly, I'd rather teach someone the technicality of something than to have to try and teach them how to talk to somebody else in a way that honors and builds relationship. So I think it's really important to not shortchange exchanges. So in my staff, with my staff, and with others, I talk about being present. Sometimes that takes longer than you expect. As a result, you might be late. You might be late. And you might need to explain, I was being present with someone. I needed to be where I was. It's no less value of your time. Does that sound strange to people to hear, right? Because what's the saying, time is the most valuable thing you have? That's right, so be present with it. That's a different way of thinking about it. These are things that I think we need to learn from the cultures who have been formed a lot longer than ours. There's some of those leadership traits and ways of being that we thought weren't as important, and they really are. And I think the people who I admire and who are so successful know how to do those things. So I hope that answers that question a bit.
Thank you. Anyone? Yeah.
Linnea, could I add to what you just said? I think it's also important to sort of how do we get comfortable with being uncomfortable? You said it's okay for it to be hard. So I think part of that is practicing being in spaces where things are hard and uncomfortable. And I think that in Minnesota, and maybe this is in the Midwest in general, I think we have a relatively low tolerance for discord, conflict, and feeling uncomfortable. We want to run from anything uncomfortable as quickly as possible. We want to say the nice thing to smooth it over and everybody feels okay as quickly as possible. And I think that that is in part some of what is behind the disparities we experience in Minnesota, because we want to say the right thing, and maybe in our hearts we feel the right thing, we want to do the right thing, but always our actions don't reflect what we say. And then we don't talk about that, though. We continue to be nice. So I think part of what we have to do is practice that skill of being in spaces of conflict, of doing things that are hard, of doing things that take time, building relationships. You can't rush it, and start with that practice in our personal lives, in our families, with our friends, and then baby step our way into doing that in our staff meeting or in our small team meeting.
Tom would like to.
If I could add to that, I totally agree. Design thinking creates a space to deal with these kinds of conflicts too. So we've are concluding a big project with Hennepin County around adult foster care housing, adults living in group homes. Up to this point, they've never been given a choice. They've been assigned a group home. The courts now say that this community has to have choice. So for the first time ever, the governmental staff at the state and the county level were actually in the room with residents living in these homes, and the residents were asked, how do you want to live? They had never been asked that question. Once they realized we were sincerely wanted to listen, they came up with an incredible array of creative ideas, which we're right now prototyping. But it was great because the people who were delivering this service and regulating this whole program realized that by being in a space where they were very uncomfortable initially, opened up possibilities. And so now even the state workers and the county regulators say they're enjoying their own jobs more because they now are part of a creative process.
Right. I mean, it certainly must feel much more meaningful for the staff themselves.
This must be a question that we all want to address. I'm glad you mentioned being present. In healthcare, I developed a theory called the base of nursing practice. And the first element of that is being present. And why being present is so critical, no matter how much time it takes, you're exactly on the spot with that, is when you're fully present with people, the stories come out. It's not data, it's stories. What's the lived experience of being in a hospital bed, or having a chronic illness, or having pain that's off the charts, or not being listened to? That's the only way we're going to figure out what the correct medicine is. What is going to work to perhaps lift you to a higher quality. I'm happy to say that the Fairview mHealth nurses have taken this on as their patient practice model for nursing now. They are going to be applying the base of nursing practice as how they nurse. So they're not going to go to the computers first and be watching the computers and living off the computers. They're going to be fully engaged with their patient.
Thank you, Teddy. Yes.
One more thing to that. The conversation led me to a place where I was reminded of a video that people might have seen. It was Randall Stevenson, who's the CEO of AT&T, talking about racial tension, and I think it's something that you should check out and take a look at. It's not a long video, but I think the one thing I didn't say is it has to be everyone's job. And that's a change, right? There's been the department that does it, or the person who does it, or the add-on to a job that does it. It has to be everyone's job. And what I think that Mr. Stevenson really captured is that it was his job, and he didn't make space for it. And he found out and was really inspired by what had been going on. He talked to who he defined as his best friend, who was African American, who never shared with him what he experienced, and he cried openly, and it's really a touching video. But I think that's the other piece, is how much space do you take up, having to balance that, and then as organizations making sure it's truly everyone's job, a part of leadership development inside the organization, a standard for entry-level people, and a standard for the chief levels of people as well. Yeah.
Thank you. That was, yeah, I just wanted one point. Thank you for raising that question. I think it's a really powerful one. The one thing I would add is that, and this connects to me personally with my design thinking work and equity and diversity work, which is we have to kind of work on ourselves and our systems, kind of be aware of where we're coming from. So if the goal of the government department is to kind of go through a checklist, have we checked, have we asked this community and so on. We're bringing that old world mindset to the work, and it isn't about building the relationship, necessarily that's driving it. And so I think, but we can change that over time. So I think the thing I've learned, thanks to Ann Phibbs and others in education and equity and diversity work, is the notion that Linnea mentioned, that diversity and equity and design thinking is everybody's everyday work, and then we work on ourselves all the time, so it's a lifelong project, so that allows us to work on it over time. So thank you. Next question.
I'm wondering if someone can speak to your experience of design where you had users who had widely varied experience themselves and varied needs from each other, and maybe also varied attitudes towards each other, and how you handle that difference of power or comfort with the design space.
Yeah. Do you want to go? You should answer. I think. Well, actually, this involves both Linnea and me, But for the higher ed redesign project, we had 4 teams, and we had a design problem that was focused on higher ed and open resources and so on. And we had framed it really nicely and neatly and had the teams to start work on it. Well, we had people like Linnea who were kind of deep thinkers and had sort of profound experience of our system. So right away they pushed back on those of us who had designed the design thinking experience and said, you're starting way sort of on the bottom. We're questioning everything and the systems themselves and, our hierarchies, our disparities and all of that. And so then as planners of that workshop, we just, stopped everything, listened, and then sort of went back to the drawing board with the teams. And then this But maybe you need to sort of add to what your experience of that
I
was.
didn't even think about that aspect from your experience, but it probably felt like mutiny after well-planned
while,
efforts.
yeah.
But the effort was about how do you redesign higher education to be more inclusive to the growing populations. So yeah, we did say we got to go back to the canon
Yep.
because that's where it went wrong.
Right.
But anyways, that's a story for another day. There's some videos online I'm sure you can watch about it. But in our design team, we had an artist, we had an architect, we had me, we had someone who was an administrator in higher education. And there are those challenges that come up. You know, the designer's like, I do design every day. I can do this right now. And, you know, came in with an idea and a solution in mind and moved forward. So I think that setting the ground rules is so essential, and using those with like as a ritual, as a tradition, every time you enter space, that you correct and check your behavior. The natural intuition inside isn't the problem. That's always going to be there. It's how do you be self-aware and correct that behavior before it comes out of your mouth. Or if it does, because that's going to happen sometimes, that you say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm taking a step back from that." But a big part of that is about creating those traditions and those rituals that make sure that people are coming together and allowing the space for defining that relationship within the team, and also that relationship building that needs to occur. And that can't always be through the formal practice of the project. It has to be informal and relational.
And the work we did with the CDC is an example. So we had teams that included some of the top global physicians dealing with global health to people who were relatively low in the hierarchy, all on the teams together and creatively working together. There was a lot of skepticism with the power elite at the CDC saying, you mean they didn't quite say it, but you could read it. Yeah, I've got to be on this team with these people who are way below me in the hierarchy. But after they got working on it, they realized that actually all the ideas were coming from everybody. And at the last project we finished with them, many of them said that in addition to the creative ideas that came out of the teamwork was simply being on the team with people from all across the organization, of greater diversity as possible. So this process breaks down these power relationships in a powerful way.
I just want to add that if you only have two dots, there's only one way you can connect those two dots. The more dots we add, the more diversity we add, the broader and more complex our solutions are going to be, and more effective our solutions are going to be. So I'm a big believer in interdisciplinarity, where we invite different disciplines to the table. The solutions are not going to come from nurses, they're not going to come from dentists, they're not going to come from teachers. They're going to come when all of us are invited to the table to bring our specialized knowledge, whether it's knowledge, lived experience, the knowledge of your community, the knowledge of your history, the knowledge of your neighborhood, or the knowledge of perhaps a profession. But that's where the solutions are going to occur.
Rajita, we have someone who's written in a question.
Great. Thank you for your online audience too.
All right, question is, it seems that the iterative approach contradicts with the way bureaucracy works. How do you do design thinking in those spaces, for instance, government and universities?
A pause.
Why are you looking at me? Oh my. Well, it does. I mean, and I think I just came here from, I sit on a board with the Hennepin County Leadership Management Group. There's a Hennepin University partnership, and both Hennepin County and the university struggle with how can our two big organizations work together. But what's so encouraging about that work is I think there's a recognition in big bureaucracies that they have to operate differently. Design thinking is most valuable when there's something that's sort of fundamentally not working very well. And, there are a lot of other management techniques if it's about tweaking the system, making it a little more efficient or effective, Kaizen, Six Sigma. I mean, there are all these management techniques, but we're in a time, as several of us have said, where there's some fundamental dysfunction going on. Look at our politics. And so this is where design thinking is most useful because it helps us make paradigm shifts. So the challenge is, of course, is a lot of people that want to just preserve the bureaucracy the way it is. You know, I think to make it effective, you have to work both from the bottom up and the top down. You have to engage the leadership, and you have to engage the stakeholders. And if you know, it has to be at both ends. So it's the 21st century problem. We are still living in structures and systems that are very 20th century, very hierarchical, very driven by white supremacy or power relationships that come through titles. And we're in a world that's completely flat now, and power is really more about who's a good node, how many connections. And so one of the other things about this is how can I make as many connections as possible, which is also what design thinking does. So a partial answer, I guess.
And I would suggest to start when you're working inside a big bureaucracy that sometimes it works to start with a concise, relatively small project, something that has a start and an end that involves a diverse group of people, but again, a relatively small group of people. Try that. Fail in some cases, move forward, try it again, and sort of begin to change systems from inside in that way. Another point I wanted to make with regard to sort of this idea that diversity is a superior model. I don't know about you all, but sometimes it's sort of hard to visualize what we really mean by that. And we're using all these sort of words that are overused: diversity, equity, et cetera, et cetera. It reminds me of the valedictorian speech at my graduate school graduation, which was exactly about this idea about diversity. Diversity is proven in science to be superior to homogeny. And the example I can point to here in Minnesota is the planting of elm trees in the early 19th, maybe it was the 18th century, early 18th, 19th centuries. Elm trees were considered superior, good stock, wonderful canopy. We want elm trees everywhere. And of course, Dutch elm disease struck, and we lost a huge amount of our tree cover all throughout the Twin Cities. Had we planted a variety of different kinds of trees, we would have lost some elm trees, but we would have maintained a diverse, robust ecology of trees. Scott Page is an economist and a professor of complex systems who's wrote a book called The Difference that explains in very technical terms this idea that diversity trumps homogeny. Again, not because it's the right thing to do. I think that's sort of the definition we've sort of put on the reason we should value diversity, but in fact it's a fundamental scientific fact.
I want to be the champion for bureaucracy at the table. There's some protections that come from it in some ways, forcing us to move thoughtfully and slowly through some things. But also bureaucracies are made of people.
Right.
And it's important to not make it into this thing that's not us, because that's a way of not being accountable for what they do, whether it's government, you know what I mean? And then it becomes the man. And then what happens when the man's me? And that was a moment I had to go through when I was at the city of Minneapolis. I was like, I'm the man now. What? What is it? And people would talk about stuff I was doing as the man was doing it. And I was like, oh my gosh. We are the man. And we have to own that and all the good things that come with it and all the accountability that comes with it. So we can't shirk that off. In bureaucracies, solutions have always been made or found. Project management has always been there. Decisions have always been made. That's always a part that's there. This is a different tool for making those kinds of things happen. And I think Dr. Lanice Block is here maybe. I see you. Raise your hand. Raise it high. Don't be shy. So Dr. Lanice Block is a colleague of mine at Minneapolis Public Schools, leading our equity framework work. She's done that using design thinking practices and theory. She does other design thinking work. I do it there. So it's about what are the skills that people bring to the workplace and are they allowed to use them and contribute them to the workplace. And it's unlike any other kind of space. I just think that's really important to keep in mind. Wherever you're at, you can apply the best you can bring to the table. It's your decision to do so. Might be a hard decision, might come with some knocks, may not be easy, but it's still your decision to make to do it or not.
And I just want to add for the offline listener who asked this question. So an amazing thing that is happening at the university that illustrates the points we've been talking about, and I know Tom helped design that, and that is the Grand Challenge movement. We're beginning to realize that the grand challenges that we're facing cannot be solved by one discipline. So we're teaching Grand Challenge courses, and we're doing Grand Challenge research. I'm the faculty for a Grand Challenge course called Global Climate Change, Empowering a Movement. It's being taught by a nurse, me, a microbiologist, and a fish and wildlife professor. Together we come together, and we don't have the answers, but we co-create the solutions, empowering a movement to address this crisis that does impact the lives and, where I'm concerned, the health of every Minnesotan and every citizen globally. So it's a very exciting movement. And Tom, do you want to say more?
Well, no, I mean, I mean, when I proposed this to the university with colleagues, Marilyn Speedy, the dean of pharmacy, was another person who was really pushing this. We actually went so far as to say we should get rid of our departmental structure and completely reorganize the institution around problems. Now, you know, that was probably too much to suggest, because disciplines do have a role. Obviously, you have to bring knowledge to the problem, and so it's something we want to get rid of disciplines, but to sort of suppress a little bit the departmental structure and highlight the problems that we could work on together. I think we'll still end up there. I think that's where higher education and maybe education generally is going to end up going, which is working on the challenges and the opportunities that we all collectively face. But it'll take a while.
Isn't it Sweden that's reorganized their education?
Finland
that
has done so.
reorganized their system. Questions? There's a question right there.
We'll go here and then there.
I appreciated you bringing up the high context, low context work, and I do recall some research I had read several years ago by an academic out of New Mexico. I just wonder if you have a source for that material or a reference that you use?
Almost every textbook on multicultural communications or intercultural communication will cover, and there's numbers out there. You can just kind of, it's a core aspect of that work from the communications field, and probably some anthropological resources would cover that as well. But for sure, every book on multicultural or intercultural communications would cover that.
Hi. Thank you. I'm interested in finding a place for ancient knowledge, and I know we talked about the different revolutions, and I'm interested in preserving not just hunter-gatherer skills, but also agricultural and industrial revolution skills, digital skills, and I think possibly we are on the verge of a new revolution, and it probably isn't digital, it's probably something else, because I think people are already looking at the digital revolution as a thing of the past, and there are all the problems with it and all of the benefits of it, but it's becoming more just a tool. But I'm also worried that we're losing ancient knowledge, and it's being derogatorily called primitive, when it's really very relevant to today. So I'm interested in how we can keep this ancient knowledge and some of what we've learned in the past and make it all fit together, because I think it does dovetail in a lot of ways.
Thank you. Any panelists?
Well, I'm always struck as we do this work how often we get back to very basic human needs of community, of communication, and in some ways, I think building on what Deanna was saying about diversity and as ecosystems, human ecosystems are diverse, and the kinds of things that we've been talking about are the kinds of things human communities have long done. And so in a way, I find it takes us back to earlier modes of being where we were in conversation with diverse groups of people with diverse knowledge. And in some ways, I think we're getting past a century, a 20th century, that was about monocultures, that was about power and hierarchy, and that divided us. And I find a huge desire to go back to earlier ways of being and doing. So in that sense, I think there is a kind of an ancient quality to it, even though we use these new tools.
Just to build on that, it seems like the term digital nomad kind of comes from that, this idea of ancient nomadic ways of being, but now in the digital world. Sorry.
I published for the first time ever a little blog post on LinkedIn where I kind of talked about that as I was trying to wrap my head around what did I need to be in 2017 given what had just gone on in the larger space around us. And I think we can't be complacent that there aren't people who want to be monocultural. And listening to NPR the last couple days, it's been disturbing to hear some of the things coming out of areas in Europe that I didn't think I would be hearing from certain communities. So I think we have to be aware and ever vigilant and start thinking about that more thoughtful in our space. How are we going to continually be a superhero for equity and inclusion and for the future we want to see? And we can't be complacent and keep it in this ethereal academic context, because I think that's how we got where we are today. And I'm a part of that. You know, I realize as my life goes on, my circle's gotten smaller and smaller, and where I'm able to spend my time and who's in that group, and I need to focus on that. So I just have been thinking a little bit about older ways of doing things, and I didn't use the term ancient, but I do think that as in my team's very diverse, and for those coming from indigenous communities here, those on my team coming from Africa, and hearing frankly the calm that they've had, that I feel comes from a sense of having culture tie over millennia, is very different at how they approach the challenges in front of them. And frankly, I've been jealous because I don't have that sense of calm right now internally, and the patience that comes with that and knowing. So I've been dedicated and talked to my staff about what are books we can read to find what are our culturally normed ways of leadership that we need to look to. And one of those things came to mind to me today from the African tradition, Sankofa, reaching back, looking back as we move forward and bringing those along with us. That's a part of design thinking. It has to be. That's a core part of the practice. But it's what we're looking for, I don't think is in technology. I think it's in the cultures we've left behind. And those we've never allowed to the table. And I think that that is where we need to spend some time. And so we've been looking for books that can help us with that, having dialogues with groups and communities. But I think that those are arts that we need to join in on. Those where we bring and our cultural groups bring to the table, but also through dialogue connecting to other cultural groups and what are those practices that they bring to the table.
Even as we have more questions, I just wanted to say we in the Twin Cities are actually the living home of many people from these different ancient cultures. So that's another place where we can actually directly connect to them.
I'd like to just quickly recommend the book, and I can't remember the title of the book, but it's by Sharif Abdallah. And he talks about makers, breakers, and keepers. And makers were the people who walked upon the land and learned directly from the land. The breakers are the people we've seen around us who have broken those traditions to our own peril. And then the keepers who go back and, like you said, Sankofa, recover what was best in the past, but also acknowledge that the breakers have some benefits too, emergent health care and things that have also advanced life and promoted well-being. So finding the best of these various systems throughout time and keeping them as we move forward.
Any last questions? I was looking to both sides of the room here. That has been very
We have
quiet.
one more online. Oh, we'll get this one.
Hi. So I work in government, and I'm part of a team that explicitly uses design thinking to solve inequitable systems. And I wanted to get back to Deanne's point just about, which I think we really need to, or the challenge rather, that design thinking isn't going to kill white supremacy. But the question of how do we ensure that design thinking isn't used to reinforce white supremacy? And also, again, working within government that is innately embedded with white supremacy, can it really be effective to solve problems?
So I think sort of threading together thoughts that many of us mentioned today, I think it's up to us. I think that part of the effectiveness of design thinking is its ability to be sort of chunked out, for it to be used on big systems work, but for it to also be used in small groups that are inside systems that are seeking to push boundaries inside. Um, I, I truly believe that we have to become more practiced in being uncomfortable and in saying the hard thing that many people are probably thinking, but no one wants to confront because it's gonna feel uncomfortable for us and like for the whole room now for the rest of the meeting. We practice this in my organization. Our team is about 100 now, 70 youth that work for our company, and then 30 adults. We have smaller group meetings, and at times conflict will come up, and folks will want to quickly sweep it aside and say, no, we don't disagree, except actually we do. And I remind people that this meeting is an hour and a half, and we can all tolerate feeling uncomfortable for an hour and a half while we dig into this. So I mention that to say, how do we ensure that we're not using this sort of fancy model design thinking, but applying it in very traditional ways and not really doing too much that's really breaking down any barriers or breaking down systems that are reinforcing inequality? I think it's by practicing saying the hard thing, practicing engaging in uncomfortable conversations, and just getting more comfortable with that and over time.
Okay, I guess that may have been the last word. Do we want to address keep the time?
I think it's 3 o'clock, so.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up here. I wanted to thank our panelists. Each one of them has provided wonderful insight into the topic. And I think now you know who they are, so you can follow up and stay back if you like for further conversation. I just wanted to say that there's a lot to think about from what we heard today, but I'm leaving with the feeling that diversity is fundamental to design thinking, to practicing good design thinking, and then that design thinking will be fundamental perhaps to actually advance equity and diversity if we use it appropriately. So with that, thank you so much.